Welcome to Dumpster Times, issue number 31. Today it's Boomer versus Zoomer. Yes, I'm the Boomer, and here's my guest, the Zoomer. Want to tell us all about yourself?
Yeah. Hello. My name is Brandon Meeker. I am a lifelong Highland Square resident, um, student of politics, student of history, standing humbly at the feet of John Brown, the
Yeah.
greatest Akronite who ever lived. Yeah. I'm currently in the middle of my master's in applied politics and aiming to work in local politics, Akron politics at some point. Been a lifelong student of history and politics.
The whole impetus for this conversation for me was
Mm.
thinking back to that bar we used to go watch the debates at. Remember
Yes.
you and
Yeah,
Martin
Barmacy.
Pharmacy? And
Martin and I are planning on going back there because they got a pool table. So we want to shoot.
there
We
you
couldn't get
go.
together for his birthday, so we were thinking of going back to Barmacy.
So it was in the fall and we were watching the debates and we were getting pretty excited until it all fell apart with COVID.
Mm. And the moderates dropping out,
And the
you know,
moderate and
collectively to give Biden the edge.
the world just collapsed before our eyes. And the people who are in the Bernie movement, what are we doing? Where are we? Are we a we? Or are we just lonely souls struggling alone in the wilderness of the Rust Belt?
It's difficult to, you know, it's difficult to be a progressive, kind of, because there is no we, there's no centralized movement like there is when Trump got elected and the quote unquote resistance movement came up. And while it was decentralized, there was no real head. It was very much a community of people and very like with a common goal. And leftists don't have that because leftists are typically more educated and it's a lot of self-education. So it's a lot of splinter groups dedicated to their specific view of how the world should be. And, I think Bernie provided kind of that common goal, but now he's old and he has disappointed in some ways for some sects of progressives. So right now, progressivism and leftism is back to this kind of decentralized chaos of infighting, where there's a general consensus of how the world should be, but no one can quite agree upon how we can get there or what's worth pursuing or what is possible. I mean, there are a lot of disagreements on every one of those fronts, and also just a lot of like theory bullshit too. Not that theory is bullshit, but there's a lot of theory bullshit that people who educate themselves like to espouse. There's a lack of practicality in the movement that other ideological groups, especially conservatives, have in abundance. The Republican Party, despite their flaws and despite the schism that is really affecting them right now, are very good at campaigning and coalescing their voter base. And that is something that Democrats always struggle with, in the electorate more so, because in like in houses of politics in like the federal House of Representatives, for example, the Democratic Party there, the Democratic caucus, is very adept at coalescing its members and demanding loyalty. Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries, despite their flaws, are very, very good at that. And that's something I will give both of them. But statewide Democratic parties in a lot of states, especially redder states,
If
don't
only
have
they
that.
could use those skills for the betterment of all instead of to fatten their own pockets. I mean,
Yeah.
Pelosi has
Well,
accumulated great wealth from insider knowledge. We know that.
yeah, it was like reported just yesterday that Pelosi had made $3.6 million last year from stocks and insider trading. And it's kind of a marvel that it's not being dealt with at that level.
Because they all do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
except for the squad.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And it's also on the squad front, it's also frustrating because we're slowly seeing like AOC being sucked into the machine a little bit. asked about, not that I want to talk about this at any length, but asked about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and she doesn't immediately call for a ceasefire. She, equivocates on both fronts, and it's like, it's a little disappointing to see. It's not unexpected, but
They all
it's
do.
disappointing. Yeah,
Did you read
it's
those letters from my two senators and my representative
I
about,
read Sherrod's.
I
I
felt
read Sherrod's,
I
and
felt his was very condescending. Oh, this is
yeah,
so complex and you just don't understand. There's so many complexities. No, there's not really. You are a part of the military industrial complex. And the more you fund weaponry, the more we will have wars. That is a very simple concept.
yeah, and it's something that politicians aren't necessarily proud of. So obviously they're not going to um say it. From the times I've spoken with Sherrod, I have gotten that sent, on issues that he doesn't particularly like to discuss, he will be more curt about it. But I still think from a political standpoint, Sherrod's a very valuable person to have in federal government, because I think he is one of the very few Democratic populists who are actually Democrats. Um, Whereas people like John Fetterman or Joe Manchin or other Democrats who come from Midwestern states and use populist tactics, don't. They use populist tactics and then they get into the government and they drift very far to the right very quickly. Like you see with Fetterman.
What a big
Yeah,
disappointment he was.
disappointing.
Whoa.
Disappointing. It's yeah. I mean, watching him devolve in the way he has is um it's sad, really, especially since he ran using the word progressive over and over and over and over.
Exactly. And he was so good at social media and skewering
Yeah.
his opponent that's all we saw.
Well, I don't know. Maybe his stroke actually did affect his mind because, well, yeah, I mean, because it's such a stark difference from how he ran. He's it's odd. It's odd. He's like feverish about his right wing drift and like denouncing like radical leftists, the people who worked on his campaign, even. Yeah. But to my point, I think that's a reason. That's the reason why I will never totally disown Sherrod, because I very much am an advocate for left-wing populism, and I think Sherrod is one of the people in federal politics who does it very well.
I remember his greatest moment. Before he was my senator, he was the representative for my district. So I've been voting for him for a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember the Canadian troop was doing a parade through Firestone Park, and Sherrod
Hmm.
Brown's car was right in front of us as we were marching.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he didn't stay in his car. He's out the whole parade. He was out shaking the hands and talking to everyone as he walked along
Hmm.
the parade route.
One of Sherrod's great strengths is his ability with people. When I first met him, I was a freshman in college. It was my undergrad, and I just like went to see him talk about his book that he had released then. Only read the first couple chapters, but I remember liking it.
I know my bird
But
book. I'm only on page 29.
yeah,
After
right now I'm reading a lot about U.S. Grant. Um, but I was like last in line to get a signed book, so I wasn't able to get a book, but I was able to meet him. I was able to get my picture taken and talk to him a bit about healthcare, um, which at the time was my forefront issue. Still is in some ways. But then I was outside the library. It was at the main library in Akron, and I was waiting for an Uber outside, and his car was happened to be waiting there. I didn't realize it until he and Connie Schultz stepped out, and he recognized me, and his car was waiting, but he like took his time to shake my hand again and ask what I was doing and if I was in school, and he took the time to like get my info, like what was my deal. And that's something that I'll remember as someone who is going into the realm of politics, not necessarily an elected office, but someone who is going into like political communications and, for lack of a better term, like political PR or something. I think that's a very valuable skill for a candidate to have. And it really does make a positive effect on your constituents when you not only meet them, but take the time to talk with them, not necessarily just at them.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah.
I worked on his first Senate campaign and I went to his
Mhm.
inauguration in Washington, D.C. The campaign organized buses and we all went down and
Nice.
yeah, it was great. It was great fun. And I felt so proud of myself.
Yeah.
If he were surrounded by other more populist senators, he would be a different person. He kind of goes where the majority goes in terms of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's definitely like good by comparison, but also I'll take it.
Yeah. You look at
Especially
who he's
since,
running against, right?
well, yeah, God.
But
And really, and I'm worried about this upcoming election because he's been kind of an institution in Ohio politics, but the Ohio Democratic Party, especially as of late, has just been in complete shambles. I mean, there's no organizing power. I
it,
mean,
it's a disgrace. The Ohio Democratic Party is a disgrace. Who was they? I can't even remember their names, but one after another, they'd put up a candidate for a statewide office, and there would be some flaw that no one had found until they started running, and then no one would vote for them
yeah, the
over and
Strickland
over.
campaign.
Or they would put up women finally, but they wouldn't build them up to the point where everyone knew them, like Nan Whaley.
Well, a couple of months ago, the Ohio General Assembly voted to close the marital rape loophole in Ohio's rape law. So, it was almost unanimous that they voted to um, close this loophole that said if two people are married, then any kind of non-consensual sex isn't rape. And only one representative voted against it, and it was Bill Dean of Xenia, a Republican. Xenia is a place near Dayton. And his justification was just that he personally thinks that if two people are married, the husband cannot rape the wife because of the vows they had taken. And there was no backlash. No,
Oh,
no, no, no Ohio Democratic leaders came out against him or called for his resignation, which they should have.
no, it's his religion here in Ohio. Our religion rules everybody else's best interests, right?
Yeah, I thought that was insane that nobody went out against him on that because I mean, even if that were a federal representative and he had said those words and said that he believed that, he would be out of there. Like that's not acceptable for someone who is elected into an office to think. Obviously people will say like, oh, that's thought crimes. People are getting canceled for things they're not doing. But it's like for elected officials, there have to be standards. There have to be certain qualifications you have to meet to represent people. And I think one of them should be that you think that rape is rape unequivocally.
Exactly.
I think that's a mentally sound thing to think.
And that when someone says no, you respect
They
that.
mean it. They mean it and you abide by it.
No, no, no.
Exactly. Yeah, but yeah, Ohio politics in particular are rather frustrating. But, you know.
Do you feel like we have somewhat of a wind behind our tails with the statewide initiatives? Do you think that is
Well,
encouraging?
yeah. I think here's the Ohio voter base is a lot more liberal than the politician makeup of Ohio suggests, and that's true for everywhere. I
Mhm.
mean, you know, after November's issue one passed and abortion was enshrined in the Constitution, Mike DeWine, smartly, when Republicans were trying to restrict the amendment, trying to do whatever in their power to restrict the effect, DeWine, vetoed it and voted it down because he recognizes that abortion is now a losing issue for Republicans. So, and that's political savvy. And it's because almost two-thirds of Americans support reproductive rights. I mean, it's just one of those issues that, it went the way of gay marriage, where it's just one of those issues now where more and more people have gotten on board with it as a freedom, and politicians that are against it are becoming less and less palatable to the American public. So they have to change their game.
So
So when
Republicans in Ohio just turned their sight on trans kids.
mhm, because that is the hot button issue of the day. That's the issue that still polarizes people enough that Republicans can still wage culture war nonsense on it. So, and again, DeWine in another episode of Political Savvy, vetoed the bill that the Ohio General Assembly put forth, but then he issued his own executive action, limiting it in a similar way, but with much more palatable language, a lot more nuanced, because the Ohio General Assembly are kind of the Ohio Republican Party at large is kind of like one giant rabid dog. They attack and they don't really have any. They're not very smooth, is what I'm saying. And DeWine has been in the game for like 4 decades, and he knows how to pass things that the majority of his people won't support, and that is with smooth language and a lack of a vote. So
What do you think he's
yeah,
going to do after governor?
I think he's going to be one of the most in-demand consultants in Ohio.
Hmm.
Yeah. Or maybe he'll just enjoy his retirement and his big old house with all his money.
Well, as
Who
well,
knows?
good. You know,
Yeah, right.
there
He's earned it.
I would encourage so many politicians to retire right now. Joe Biden, why don't you retire?
Yeah, that's unfortunate because he's gonna lose.
So
Hmm.
you think that Biden is actually going to lose the election to Trump?
Hmm.
All right, great.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Before the October 7th attack in Israel, I would have said that Trump is the only person that Biden could defeat. Um, But now, after Biden's months of unabashed support for Israel, even in the face of mounting calls for a ceasefire, even in the face of Israel's um, just brutal genocide against the people of Gaza, and I mean, we'll call it what it is, even in the face of, and this is, I think, is the most ridiculous part of it, South Africa's lawsuit. They are the only other major country to have gone through apartheid, and we're saying that they don't know what they're talking about.
I know.
It's ridiculous. We're saying that their lawsuit is baseless. I think they are the only ones in the unique position to know what they're talking about. But in the face of all that, Biden has added to his electoral woes that he started when he quashed the rail strike in fall 2022, because he really damaged his relationship with union workers as a whole, and specifically with rail workers, which there are a lot more than you think. And he largely repaired those relationships when he joined the UAW picket line, but still, rail workers not too happy with him.
Really?
Uh,
Is it
oh
because
yeah,
auto workers are sexier than railroad workers? Why did he do that?
the union's bigger. The union's
Uh,
bigger, more politically active.
hmm.
But when Biden quashed the rail strike, and like 2 weeks later, the train in East Palestine crashed, spilling toxic waste into Ohio's one of Ohio's two main rivers. I think into like one of the Cuyahoga River's estuaries or something.
Yeah.
Um, that was a direct result of quashing the strike, because the safety regulations that rail workers were fighting for would have prevented that. It would have prevented hazardous chemicals from being carried on commercial railways. They would have been carried on special railways with heightened safety precautions. But the strike was quashed by Congress at Biden's orders. So, the train crashed, and it wasn't even the only one. Like two other train crashes with similar environmental effects happened within 3 weeks of that crash. So that was the start of it. And then with the whole Israel genocide against Gaza, Biden has lost irreparably the progressive vote, the youth vote, majority of the youth vote at least, because the majority of youths support a ceasefire and Biden refuses to call for it. And critically, he has unequivocally lost the Arab vote.
Oh, yeah. I can't see
And
one of Arab ancestry would vote for him.
yeah, yeah, no, he has lost the Arab vote by and large. And that voter block carried him through Michigan and through Pennsylvania. And those are two states he is going to have to win. He cannot win the election without them. And without the Arab vote, I doubt he's going to win those two states. And I doubt he's going to win in general. That is a critical voter block in the United States, especially now, with Donald Trump's history of racism against Arab people.
Boy, are Arab people stuck between a rock and a hard place, to use an old cliche.
Exactly.
There's
Exactly.
Trump, who's gonna put up his Muslim bans again, right? I mean, saying it in name, full out, Muslims are banned from the US. And then there's Biden, who can't do anything to protect someone who has less than white skin anywhere in the world.
Yeah. He, the only hope for Biden is that Trump is actually convicted of a crime. If the trial ends before election day and Trump is convicted of a crime and he is ineligible for office, and critically, this has to happen. I mean, it's tough even then, because then, you know, we have the vice presidential candidate, but even I don't know. It's odd. Campaign, because this has never happened before. It's really interesting to see what will happen, because if the vice president is the only one left on the campaign, he can't just start campaigning for president, because the Republican National Committee will have to nominate that person for president. They have to get the convention back together and they have to nominate that person to the presidential nomination. That's how theoretically it would work. So they can't just ascend to the president like if they were already in office.
But
So that could be
but what if Trump says to the Republican National Committee, I refuse to be taken off the ballot. You guys are frauds, and I'm going to sue you all. And we go through the next round of endless law shenanigans with Trump while he still maintains his position.
And that's going to be probably the worst constitutional crisis in US history.
And look,
If that happens, because we still have to hold an election. Like these aren't just like traditions that we hold. It's like a machine. You know, the election is going to happen whether anyone votes or not. And the votes are still going to be counted whether anyone votes or not, whether we have any candidates. You know, the election is still going to happen. It is definitely like a machine with cogs that turn automatically. People aren't just going to like stop the election unless everything was on fire all at once. So if Trump does refuse to be taken off the ballot if he's convicted of a crime, then therein lies a constitutional crisis. And I don't know if they delay the election, which would be absolutely unprecedented. And I don't think they do that, because good Lord, imagine the outcry from
I
conservatives if
know,
they
look
did
at
that.
Gore versus Bush. That they really turned fast on that one, you know.
Well, yeah. So the Supreme Court, I imagine they would be the ones that had to get involved, and I'd imagine they'd probably fine for Trump. But who knows? Roberts is kind of wishy-washy on that kind of thing.
Probably secretly hates Trump.
Oh, I'd imagine. I'm sure Roberts, and to an extent Alito are, and maybe to an extent Gorsuch, are never Trumpers at heart. Who knows? I don't really care about them. But it'll be very interesting if Trump gets convicted of a crime and is rendered by law ineligible to take office, because I could definitely see him refusing to recognize that law, and that will definitely cause a major uproar no matter what happens. But I do think that is Biden's literal only chance.
If the Republicans get smart and kick Trump off the ballot, they would win. They would win big.
Oh yeah.
But they're not
No,
willing to
Biden.
do that. It's so weird.
I mean, they're scared of Trump. They're scared of his family. Look at January 6th. That's a Trump supporters showed us what they can do. Someone died, you know. I mean, it was a Trump supporter who died, but someone died. A cop was critically injured. A Capitol cop was critically injured. Destruction of property. They were looking to hurt and kill members of Congress, you know, and they'll do it again. They have said repeatedly that they would 100% do it again. So, yeah, Republicans are scared of that. I mean, they're scared of the reaction because it's a sizable base now. Trump has built himself a throne of people that will act as an army as well.
You know,
when they
all
need to.
that has to happen is that the Supreme Court decides that the 14th Amendment is as written and Trump is permanently off the
Yeah.
ballot forever.
Yeah, where are our originalists now?
Yeah.
Oh, you think the Constitution should be interpreted just as written? Well, now's your chance. No, I literally the other week I read that clause out loud. It's no person who swore an oath to protect this Constitution shall take up arms, either weaponry or not, against the federal government, or else they will be tried for insurrection. Now that doesn't say anything about the people. because the Constitution does, you know, implicitly guarantee that, you know, if the government ain't working out, people can revolt. And, you know, for the Constitution, that's kind of fine. But it does say that people who took an oath to swear took an oath to swear to protect the Constitution, which at the time Donald Trump did. He was still president. Um, and he definitely incited people, you know. Yeah, I don't know. Get our originalists on board. Let's see how
Pretty
much they
soon,
sweat.
pretty soon we're going to see how the Supreme Court is viewing things, which will set us up
I
for.
think we've seen it for a while. You know, I think Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett are two ravenous, and Thomas as well, ravenous ultra-conservative nut jobs. Gorsuch and Roberts are your classic kind of like Bush era conservatives, you know, rule of law kind of people. And you know, Kagan and Sotomayor and uh Ketanji Jackson Brown are, you know, Obama liberals.
Over in the corner, just sort of
And who's the other person? There's
Roberts is the
Oh no, I was thinking of Alito. Hold on, Alito is in the middle, I think, of the Roberts camp and the Thomas camp. Although he's leaning more towards the Thomas camp. I don't know. I just today I had to create a whole presentation about a campaign finance case heard before the court.
ooh,
Had to read had to read Alito's opinion, and it's horseshit. Davis versus the FEC ruled that the Millionaires Amendment of the Bipartisan Campaign Regulation Act, or something, you know, McCain-Feingold, was unconstitutional. Here's the story. This very rich industrialist was running for New York 26 in 2008, self-funded. And at the time, BICRA, McCain-Feingold, maintained that if a self-funded candidate goes over a certain threshold for House candidates, it was $350,000. Then their opponent's own threshold for donations and money spent rate rises because it's an uneven playing field. And Davis sued. Ironically, Davis was a Democrat. He went before the district court saying that it violated his First Amendment and Fifth Amendment rights. And the district court rejected both counts, and the FEC further said that the case was moot because he had no standing. And the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of Davis and ruled that the Millionaire Clause did violate the First Amendment because it said that, I mean, essentially said they called Alito used the term asymmetrical regulations. He said that if the clause had applied to everyone, there would be no issue, but because it penalizes self-funded candidates for being able to self-fund by giving their opponent more leeway on non-self-funded money, then it was unconstitutional, violated the First Amendment protections. I don't really get it either because it's not political speech. And it was before Citizens United, so it was before they ruled that political speech is speech.
that was a knife to the heart.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Political speech.
why can't there be just speech? Why
Yeah.
can't there be people talking and that's it?
I want to get to a couple meta questions here.
Sure.
As a Zoomer, what do you see ahead
Mhm.
of you? I'm not going to be around in 20 years, probably.
Yeah.
What's your life going to be like on this planet,
Well,
country?
I'm a I'm a happy warrior. I'm an optimist. I think the only things that will change is that it'll be warmer. Um, and hopefully a lot of the problem children of the government will be dead. So, you know, McConnell and Biden and Trump and all them, you know, again, 20 years down the line, we will have a completely different makeup of politician. And I hope that means that it will be a little more left leaning. But realistically, I don't think much is going to change. I mean, look at how similar things are today than they were, you know, in the Bush era, which was 20 years ago. 2020 or 2004 was Bush's second election. You know, crazy to think about, right? Whoa. But think about how little things have changed from then. I think we're in kind of a stasis politically until all the older people die and are replaced with more liberal generation of politicians. And even then, you know,
Well, we just got to let
change,
COVID do its job, right? Get rid of all those
change,
people.
real political change, even when there are large movements behind it, violent and nonviolent, tends to be incremental until there's one all-encompassing piece of legislation. Um, and I don't quite know what that piece of legislation would be. If it would be climate-based, if it would be civil rights-based. If it were civil rights-based, would it relate to the LGBTQ community? Would it relate to women? Would it relate to people with disabilities? I don't know. Would it relate to anti-racism? We have a lot going on right now and not a lot responding to it because all the people in power were in power 30 years ago. Um, and they weren't doing much then either. So 20 years from now, it's hard to say. I don't think much will change, but I hope that there will be a few key differences that make it better.
Well, as a doomer, I have seen many wars during my lifetime of 72 years. And as a boomer generation person, young person, there were maybe 5% of us who are anti-war. And every generation it's that way. You're in the movement, you're fighting, and you think you're making progress, you're a progressive, but it's that great big wall of stubborn Republican establishment, war, militarism that's not going to move, hasn't moved. It's
Yeah,
frustrating.
and it is frustrating. And there are those the military industrial complex for one, that won't move. That won't change. It's too profitable. Too many people are invested in it. That
Can't
won't
we
change.
invest in technology, massive technology that makes our lives better?
Well, look at what happens when you invest in technology. You get Elon Musk. I mean, the bad apples are everywhere if you want to invest in the future. I think we should be focusing on the now so that the future is better by default. You know,
Think
and we don't.
locally.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a friend this past summer, telling him about how I was applying to schools on the East Coast for graduate school. And, I wanted to do my internship on the Hill, yada, yada, this, that, the other thing. And he had done that because he went to school in DC. And he told me that, it's ungratifying. You won't like it. I mean, you, you, you understand that the political game is there and everyone plays it and you're prepared for that, but everything moves so slowly and everyone is like in a bad mood. Um, and every big movement starts locally anyway. And he said if he would do it over again, he'd work local politics. And that's what I'm focusing on now because I think and again, I've read a lot about small town decay throughout America. This past semester, especially, all my classes, final projects focused on left-wing populism and why Republicans are so good at it and why Democrats are so bad at it, and what conditions make rural people vote conservative and all that. And I'm fortunate enough to live in a sizable city, especially one as unique as Akron. And I think Akron is in a moment right now where a lot of cool stuff can happen. We have a new young mayor who has been the face of city council for a couple years. He's a known entity. He wants to get stuff done. We have yeah, I think Akron politics is very potent right now. There's a lot of cool stuff that can happen. I am excited to work in that context more than I ever was excited at the theory of working in DC.
I think it's
If
because you
you
can actually see when you make
exactly,
a difference. You can see
exactly.
people's lives changing right in front of you.
The results are smaller, but they're tangible, and tangibility accounts for a lot. So, again, federal government is massive. It's grand. You get to work in the marble halls of Congress. But, if you work there for 3 years and barely anything gets done, because you're one of a million people who are there to change the world, I can get how that's ungratifying. And I
I
can
think
get how it sucks your soul out.
this might be a good time to share a quote from The Squad by Ryan Grimm.
Sure.
It is considered poor form in Congress borderline self-indulgent for a freshman to sit at length in congressional hearings when the time could instead be spent raising money. The purpose of being on a good committee, a money committee, as they're known, is to be able to fundraise from the industry the panel oversees. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's kind of comes to a head for me because, for one, I'm a huge advocate for term limits, and recycling the government every 2 years is a good idea. However, it's no wonder that nothing gets done when Congress people have to spend 2/3 of those 2 years raising money for the next campaign.
And sucking up to companies and individuals to get their
Hmm.
dollars.
Yeah, I mean, what you learn in, poli sci, the more basic poli sci classes, and you see pictures of it, is, yeah, a lot of a congressperson's time is being spent shepherded to a faceless office building with rows after rows of cubicles with phones, and the congressperson will sit there for 4 or 5 hours just calling everyone in their Rolodex of the day to ask for money. And usually that comes with a guarantee of a favor.
So that they
And
can
it's
spend it on videos and commercials
mhm.
and all of that crap that doesn't really
Yeah.
tell you anything about them other than they have a great editor and videographer.
Yeah. And that's why, the grassroots candidates seem to be more active because they can rely on their small town donors. They can rely on their base to give them the money that they need. And they've built up their brand so they can just rely on those small donations. That's why AOC right out the gate was very active, because she did not necessarily have, I'm sure she has a lot, but she didn't necessarily have to go to the phone banks every day and make those calls to Mr. Monopoly and JP Morgan and all the cartoon rich people that all these politicians get their money from. Because, yeah, I mean, there are several ways of running a campaign. The easy way is the way that gets you into those phone banks.
Now, you see, if I were in control, there would be no more spending on commercials or anything like that. Every candidate would get a website and a blog, and they could
Hmm.
post their policies and platforms and answer questions there. But as for raising money, they don't need it. Just there's their opinion. There can be debates, they can be interviewed on TV, but all of this spending money on commercials and getting money from corporations is disgusting, and it has really destroyed democracy as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And there was a time when a lot of the campaign money came from the party itself. And, there was also a lot of corruption there. But I mean, there's something to be said for, the party existing as a fundraising mechanism so that their candidates don't have to ask giant donors for a lot of money. And again, it's a very slippery slope to being, a political machine, like Tammany Hall. But, which again, two bad things come to a head, which is often what happens in American politics, the lesser of two evils, so to speak, for lack of a much, much better term.
You think we'll ever get to the better of two great people?
Well, I'm sure it'll happen someday when all the evil old people are gone.
Oh no. Do you have
I
any
mean,
closing statements you'd like to make about our discussion today?
so the quote from Mike Gravel is, and it's part of my political philosophy, is be a happy warrior, be joyful, but be earnest. If you give into cynicism, you become useless.
Ah,
I have known people in my life who have become cynics, and it's very frustrating to talk with them because they are the fatalist, um, the fatalist ideal that they operate under is disheartening because they are under the impression that they can't do anything. And even when it seems the most hopeless, you can. Even donating $5 to your preferred candidate is doing something. It's mostly symbolic, but you're doing something.
exactly.
Not everyone can change the world single-handedly. That's what grassroots is all about. But the important thing is, in the face of to maladapt a Watchmen quote, in the face of Armageddon, be optimistic. Don't in the face of Armageddon, don't compromise. And by that I mean don't compromise values. Don't try not to compromise anything.
Oh, that is
Be
totally the ending of Don't Look Up, you know?
well, yeah, and that's part of being optimistic. Being optimistic means that it is okay to stick to your guns and to fight to the death for what you believe in, even if it means people are going to yell at you for it, even if it means, if you don't want to vote for Joe Biden and people will tell you, oh, so you want to vote for Trump? It's,
No, I'm gonna vote
that's
for the socialist
exactly,
state, right?
you know,
There's always
it's
one on the ballot, at least.
yeah, it's never bad to stick to your guns. And it's never bad to remain optimistic in the face of hopelessness. And
I
it's a lot better for your brain anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Cynicism tends to get very boring. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
a lot of former Bernie bros and broads who are fed up with
Bernie
Bernie and
bros.
they say awful things about him. And it's like, the man's over 80. He's led a good life. He was slow
Mm-hmm.
on the uptake with the ceasefire because of his background, his family, his life
Mm-hmm.
experience. I'm going to cut him some
Yeah.
slack.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think leftists need to remember is no one's perfect. Um, don't compromise your values, but don't expect other people to do the same. And if, you know, and again, you don't want to vote for Biden, don't vote for Biden. I'm probably not going to vote for Biden. But if Bernie ran again, even though he was slow on the uptake for ceasefire, and there are certainly things that I disagree with him about, I would vote for him. There, even though he's old, I would still, yeah, it is recognizing that even a flawed instrument can set in motion the machine of change, to use a bad metaphor. Um,
Good one.
an analogy. Yeah, I don't know. It's again, politics is all about nuance. Politics is all about subtleties between people, between issues on both sides of the coin, on elected official sides and on voters' sides. But the important thing to remember is, you know, if you become cynical, if you let the hopelessness and the lesser of two evils ideology get to you, then what are you going to do? You want to see the world get better? Are you just going to sit around and watch that not happen?
I think there's about 10 years in my life when I didn't vote deliberately.
Mm.
It's probably during the Clinton era because because I didn't
Yeah.
want to give them my blessing, so to speak. But eventually I got back to Akron and I started to notice that on the ballot were things that affected my life personally, like
Hmm.
there was going to be a tax increase, da 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 da. So voting became a means of self-defense. That's how
Yeah.
I get it. Somebody's propping this thing
Hmm.
up or this person up that's going to do damage to the world as I would like to view it, then I'm going to go vote against them. And
Yeah. And that's how a lot of people view it. That's how a lot of rural voters view it. A lot of people don't think about the fact that rural voters, farmers, people in small towns don't vote conservative because they hate gay people. They vote conservative because they're scared. The country is in a bad way right now for everybody, and they are particularly affected. These are people who are poor. These are people who work manual jobs in unstable markets. The agriculture market right now is
you don't
not
have
doing too
health.
hot. They don't have health care. They don't, and people in small towns, they're losing schools, they're losing jobs, they're losing money, they're losing people, you know? So people who vote conservative, more often than not, are just scared. And they have been brainwashed by the Republican Party into thinking that Republicans have their interests in mind when they don't. And Democrats, whether they do or not, are not as good at getting that message out to rural people. And that's why I think left wing populism in federal government is so valuable. And that's why I think people like Sherrod Brown are so valuable, because Sherrod Brown is the kind of guy, despite his flaws, the kind of liberal guy who can go to a union steel worker or can go to a construction worker or a coal miner and tell him that he has their back and they'll believe him. And that's not something you see with a lot of Democrats and that voting bloc.
In Ohio, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
We need more of it. We need more of happy warriors. We need more people who will look at the current state of politics and tell the people most affected, whether it's minoritized social groups or people who are struggling financially, both in cities and in rural areas, that they have their back. And that's, I think, the root of what's wrong in American government right now, is that we aren't seeing enough of that. We aren't seeing enough populism, populism.
Well, I think that's a great place to end this because I know you have to get somewhere. But
Mhm.
I'd like to thank you, Brandon, for coming. You'll have to come back as the political season progresses because this is going to be
I
quite
can, yeah.
amazing 9 months ahead of us.
Dumpster Times political correspondent.
Yes, fantastic. Thank
Like
you.
the Daily Show.
Bye-bye.
Cool. Good luck. See you later. Thanks for having me.